what we've seen in APAC, what we're seeing in LATAM, I think is the start of the next wave of what's expected.
Hardeep, thanks for joining me today. What are some of the biggest changes that you've maybe seen over kind of like the last 12 months?
If you look at Europe, it's not a fundamental shift at the moment, but I think it's coming. And actually, I think it's coming because of what you're seeing elsewhere. So I think actually what we've seen in APAC, what we're seeing in LATAM, I think is the start of the next wave of what's expected. It's not the norm across the globe to pay out every 2 days, for example, with your merchants. It's not the norm to only look at that merchant on a daily basis or a weekly or fortnightly. There is that need to drive a far quicker risk assessment, far richer risk assessment, and fundamentally then offer a better service. So yeah, I think it's an interesting time. You could argue that the last 12 months have been fairly normal, but I think that's just getting ready for where we're going next.
So we're talking about kind of quicker risk assessments or more frequent risk assessments. I guess one of the drivers of that would probably be around the rise of instant payments, right? I guess cards traditionally have been the main type of transactions that acquirers have processed. We're seeing a lot more kind of instant payments with the rise of open banking in the UK. What's your thoughts on that? How can acquirers manage some of those risks?
Actually, I think the European story is quite different to, again, a LATAM or somewhere. And actually, I think it's because open banking is not being used at quite the scale or the ways that people thought it was going to be. If you're going to look at when it first implemented, this was seen as the new way of paying, right? You'd go to a merchant and you'd pay by bank. And let's be honest, which merchant in Europe actually lets you pay by bank? They all still use the card, the details that you've got. And even from a consumer perspective, if my card is stored on that site, am I really going to go through a brand new journey to authenticate kind of a different payment method? So I'm unsure on whether that shift will happen in Europe. I think there's an ambition, but I mean, let's be honest, Google Pay and Apple Pay have probably transformed the way I buy things far more than open banking has, right? And if anything, it's probably driven me more towards using cards and not less, because it is just so easy. I get my phone out, I pay, I'm done, I move on. If I had a different way of paying, I'd only do it if there's a fundamental value in it for me. So if Amazon, for example, said you can have 10% off your purchase if you pay by bank, yeah, of course I'd look at it. But if they just said, oh, do you want to do that versus what's already there, I don't think it'll change it. And I think there's a long way to go from what the original vision was of PSD2, and I know PSD3 is trying to make that easier and simpler. I don't think we've worked out the customer experience yet. I don't see why as a consumer I would adopt that. I completely see it on the traditional banking side. I use open banking to pay my credit card and things like that, and it's a really good experience, but not in that e-commerce space yet.